I'll write the first part, 4,000 words of the story according to the outline, crafting it to appeal to women over 50 in the United States with an engaging YouTube-friendly narrative. The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. That's how my story ends and begins. But to understand how a 68-year-old woman found herself publicly humiliated at her only son's wedding, we need to go back to the beginning. My name is Eleanor Reynolds. For most of my adult life, I've worn what I call the mask of modesty. I drive a 10-year-old sedan. I work part-time at Bloom & Grow, a small flower shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I buy my clothes from discount stores. To anyone looking at me, I'm just another widow living on a fixed income trying to make ends meet in a world that seems increasingly designed to leave people my age behind. That's exactly the image I carefully cultivated for decades. What most people don't know, what almost no one knows, is that my husband William and I made a fortune in commercial real estate investments before his death 5 years ago. I live in a modest apartment, not because I can't afford better, but because it's where William and I spent our last years together. It holds the memories of our final conversations, our quiet evenings watching the city lights, and eventually his peaceful passing in my arms after a brave battle with pancreatic cancer. Visible wealth attracts problems, William used to tell me. Invisible wealth gives you power. We had watched too many of our friends fall victim to fair-weather relatives, financial scammers, and the peculiar loneliness that comes when people see your bank account instead of your humanity. So we made a choice to live simply, investing our money wisely, but keeping our success private. We didn't hide in poverty, we simply chose not to flaunt our prosperity. After William's death, maintaining this modest facade became second nature. There was comfort in the routine, tending to flowers at the shop Tuesday through Thursday, having coffee with my neighbor Frank Wilson every Saturday morning, and volunteering at the community center on Sundays. Frank has been my closest friend since William passed. At 70, he's vibrant, kind, and the only person in the building who knows anything about my financial situation, though. Even he doesn't know the full extent of it. He lives next door and has become like a brother to me, checking in regularly and always ready with a joke or a helping hand. "Eleanor," he said one morning over coffee on my balcony, "you know what I admire about you? You could be living in some mansion on the hill, but you choose to stay connected to real people. That's rare." I smiled, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the city skyline, visible from my balcony, a view that alone made my apartment worth 7 figures in this prime neighborhood. "This is home, Frank. All the money in the world couldn't replace what these walls mean to me." What I didn't tell him was that my apartment was just one piece of a larger portfolio. The downtown office building that generated $50,000 in monthly rental income. The beachfront property I'd purchased as an investment a decade earlier. The various stocks, bonds, and other investments that William had managed so brilliantly and that my financial advisor Richard Morris now helped me maintain. All told, my net worth approached $8.5 million, not a fortune by the standards of the truly wealthy, but more than enough to ensure I would never have to worry about money again. If only my son Matthew had inherited his father's financial wisdom instead of just his smile. I'll never forget the day Matthew brought Vanessa Lewis home for the first time. There was something in the way her eyes scanned my living room, calculating, assessing, that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," Matthew had said, his voice carrying that nervous excitement I remembered from when he was a boy bringing home a perfect report card. He was 33 then, working as a sales manager for a tech company, handsome in that clean-cut way that reminded me so much of his father. Vanessa was striking perfectly styled chestnut hair, designer clothes that looked effortlessly expensive, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At 28, she worked as an image consultant, though I would later discover this meant sporadic freelance work that generated little actual income. "What a cozy place you have," she said, her gaze lingering on my second-hand furniture and faded curtains. The emphasis she placed on cozy made it clear she meant small, outdated beneath her standards. Matthew didn't notice the condescension in her tone. He was too busy watching her with the look of a man who couldn't believe his good fortune. I served dinner that evening, William's favorite pot roast recipe that Matthew had loved since childhood. Vanessa barely touched her food, claiming she was watching her figure. Throughout the meal, she steered the conversation toward financial matters with surprising frequency. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Eleanor? It must be hard to get by on so little money. she asked with manufactured concern. Her head tilted in a way that was probably meant to convey empathy, but came across as calculating. I do just fine, I replied simply. My needs are modest. Mom's always been frugal, Matthew added proudly, as if my perceived financial limitations were some kind of virtue. Later, when Matthew excused himself to use the bathroom, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She answered it quietly, turning away from me, but not quite far enough. Yes, Mom. His mother's apartment is in a super expensive area, I overheard her say. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we find our own place. She's so naive, she'll probably even thank us for helping with the transition. My teacup nearly slipped from my hand. I had been watching Vanessa closely all evening, but I hadn't expected her to reveal her true intentions so quickly. When she returned to the living room, I smiled as if I hadn't heard a word, but something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just meeting my son's new girlfriend. I was watching a predator eyeing its prey. From that moment on, every interaction with Vanessa became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned, almost daughter-in-law, worried about my well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. It was like a chess match where we both thought we were winning. 2 years passed in this strange dance of false smiles and hidden agendas. Matthew and Vanessa announced their engagement, and the visits to my apartment increased along with the pressure. Eleanor, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age, Vanessa would say, spreading brochures across my coffee table like a dealer laying out cards. All-inclusive services, no maintenance worries, daily activities with peers. At your age, living alone just isn't safe, she would insist another time. What if you fall, and no one finds you for days? Each suggestion came wrapped in a veneer of concern, but her eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered: the prime location of my building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the spacious rooms that could easily be redecorated to her taste. The most painful part was watching Matthew transform into someone I barely recognized. My son, who once possessed his father's integrity and compassion, began to echo Vanessa's words like a trained parrot. Mom, Vanessa's right, he would say, avoiding my eyes. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place. After one particularly uncomfortable visit, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for weeks. I called my old friend Sophia Parker, who worked in real estate. Sophia, I need you to investigate something for me, I said quietly into the phone. There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation. What Sophia discovered chilled me to the bone. Matthew and Vanessa were drowning in debt. The wedding they were planning would cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The luxury apartment they rented was 3 months behind in payments. The cars they drove, a BMW for him, a Mercedes for her, were financed with monthly payments they could barely afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on credit cards and wishful thinking. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was a desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. What hurt the most was realizing that Matthew had allowed himself to be corrupted by this woman's ambition. The son I had raised with values of honesty and hard work had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed Vanessa to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. What Matthew didn't know, what he had never bothered to ask, was that for the past 3 years I had been secretly helping him stay afloat financially. The work bonuses he thought he was receiving were actually transfers from my account. The special discount he believed he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly to subsidize his rent. Without Matthew knowing, I had been supporting his irresponsible lifestyle for years, thinking I was helping him through a difficult time. Instead, I was enabling his transformation into someone I no longer recognized. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Eleanor, you can't keep being so selfish," Vanessa said to me just 3 days before the ceremony, dropping all pretense of concern. "Matthew and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Richard, my financial advisor, and the only person I fully trusted since William's death. "Richard, I need you to prepare some documents," I told him, my voice steadier than it had been in months. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years. Richard's voice became serious immediately. Mrs. Reynolds, are you sure this is the right time? Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships. But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. It was time for them to meet the real Eleanor Reynolds. The biggest humiliation happened just 2 weeks before the wedding during what Vanessa called an important family meeting. She arrived at my apartment not only with Matthew, but also with her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. Harold Lewis was a burly man who surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser evaluating a property. His wife, Patricia, looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect, her designer outfit and excessive jewelry making it clear where Vanessa had learned her values. "Eleanor, we want to talk to you about your future," Patricia began with practiced concern as we all sat in my living room. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," continued Harold, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days?" Their words were rehearsed too perfect to be spontaneous. Matthew had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said in a voice I no longer recognized. "They're right. Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You—" Patricia exchanged a knowing look with her husband as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Eleanor, we understand this can be difficult to accept," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "But you must think about what's best for Matthew and Vanessa." "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Vanessa took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Eleanor, it's not just about the apartment. It's about your well-being. We've been doing research, and we found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me nauseous. "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Vanessa?" She looked at Matthew for support before answering. "Well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Eleanor. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The audacity of this 30-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me, the absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. "We've run the numbers," Harold continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. "The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to help Matthew and Vanessa with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Mom," Matthew said, his voice sounding rehearsed, "we hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures, but if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions." The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I called Richard immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I told him through tears. I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything. The results of that investigation were devastating. Matthew earned $75,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Vanessa worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $15,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. But there was something else in Richard's report that had completely broken my heart. For the past 6 months, Matthew had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been inquiring about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information came at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Richard had hired, Vanessa had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable property and no competing heirs. To her, marrying Matthew wasn't love, it was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood that it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding were torture. Every phone call from Matthew was a new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Vanessa included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started to treat me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Matthew made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life," he said, his voice a mixture of frustration and rehearsed patience. "Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Vanessa just wants what's best for all of us." His words were the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And so on the day that should have been one of the happiest in our family's history, I dressed carefully in a simple navy blue dress, applied modest makeup, and drove my 10-year-old sedan to the Royal Oaks ballroom with a heart full of dread and a mind made up. Little did anyone know that this would be the day that Eleanor Reynolds would finally remove her mask of modesty and show the world and her scheming family exactly who she really was. But first, I would have to endure the greatest humiliation of my life. The Royal Oaks ballroom was everything Vanessa had dreamed of: crystal chandeliers suspended from cathedral ceilings, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, and floral arrangements that must have cost thousands. As I handed my car keys to the valet and walked toward the entrance, I felt strangely calm, like a soldier who has accepted the inevitability of battle. The ceremony itself had been beautiful, I had to admit. Whatever Vanessa's flaws, she had exquisite taste. Matthew looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, though I noticed the strain around his eyes, no doubt worrying about how they would pay for all this extravagance. A small vindictive part of me that I didn't recognize wondered how he would react when he discovered that the wedding planner discount he believed they'd received was actually my secret contribution of $22,000. I sat alone in the third row during the ceremony. No one had escorted me to my seat, a small but telling oversight. As mother of the groom, I should have been one of the first seated with honors. Instead, I slipped in quietly, another invisibility that had become routine. Patricia Lewis, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than my car, had been escorted by 2 groomsmen, while guests murmured appreciatively. After the vows were exchanged and the newlyweds processed out amid applause, I followed the crowd to the reception hall. The transformation from ceremony to celebration was seamless. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked too artistic to eat. A 12-piece orchestra played softly in the corner. I estimated the cost of this reception alone at well over $50,000. "Aunt Eleanor," I turned to see Matthew's cousin Lisa approaching with a warm smile. At 29, she was a kindergarten teacher with her father's kind eyes and genuine spirit. She'd always been my favorite niece, the only family member who still called regularly just to check on me. "You look beautiful," she said, embracing me. "How are you holding up?" Something in her tone told me she wasn't just making conversation. Lisa had always been perceptive. "I'm fine," I assured her, though the slight tremor in my voice betrayed me. "I've been worried about you," she continued, lowering her voice. "The things Vanessa's been saying about you to the family. They don't sound like the Aunt Eleanor I know. So the campaign had extended beyond just Matthew. I should have expected as much. What kind of things, I asked, though I already knew. Lisa hesitated. That you're becoming forgetful, that you can't take care of yourself anymore, that you're becoming a burden. She squeezed my hand. I don't believe any of it. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, genuinely moved. That means more than you know. We chatted for a few more minutes before Lisa was called away by other relatives. I found myself alone again, watching as Matthew and Vanessa made their grand entrance as husband and wife. The guests applauded enthusiastically, cameras flashing from every direction. They looked perfect together, Vanessa in her designer gown that hugged her figure exactly right, Matthew beaming with pride. For a moment I allowed myself to wonder, was I wrong about everything? Was there genuine love there that I had been too bitter to see? The thought evaporated when Vanessa's eyes met mine across the room. Even from a distance, I could see the calculation in them. She whispered something to Matthew, and they began making their way toward me, accepting congratulations as they moved through the crowd. Eleanor, Vanessa said when they reached me, her voice syrupy sweet for the benefit of nearby guests. Thank you so much for coming. We weren't sure you would make it. The implication that I might be too feeble to attend my own son's wedding hung in the air between us. I wouldn't miss Matthew's wedding for the world, I replied, embracing my son. He returned the hug stiffly, his eyes darting to Vanessa as if seeking approval. You look nice, Mom, he said, though his eyes barely registered my appearance. Matthew, darling, we should greet the Andersons, Vanessa interrupted, already pulling him away. Eleanor, enjoy the celebration. There's a special table for immediate family in the corner if you'd like to sit down and rest. With that, they were gone, swallowed by the crowd of well-wishers. I made my way to the special table, which I quickly discovered was positioned behind a large floral arrangement practically invisible to most of the ballroom. The other tables for family were prominently placed near the head table. My isolation was deliberate. I sat there for nearly an hour watching as Matthew and Vanessa danced, cut the cake, and mingled with their guests. Not once did they return to check on me. A few distant relatives stopped by briefly, their conversations tinged with that peculiar combination of pity and condescension people often reserve for the elderly. How are you managing on your own, Eleanor? Have you thought about getting one of those medical alert bracelets? My mother was about your age when we moved her to assisted living. Best decision we ever made. Each comment reinforced what I already knew. Vanessa had been systematically undermining me to everyone in our circle. I was contemplating leaving early when Vanessa suddenly appeared at my table without Matthew this time. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped determination that transformed her beautiful face into something harsh. We need to talk, she said, sitting down beside me. About the apartment. I took a sip of my water. I wasn't aware there was anything to discuss. Don't play dumb, Eleanor. It doesn't suit you. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Matthew and I need a place to live after the honeymoon. Your apartment is the perfect solution while we look for something permanent. I already told you I'm not moving, I replied calmly. Do you have any idea what we've gone through to make this wedding happen? She hissed, dropping all pretense. The compromises I've had to make. Matthew is drowning in debt because of this day. The least you could do is help us start our marriage without the burden of housing costs. The least I could do, I repeated, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Vanessa, have you ever considered that you're not entitled to my property simply because you married my son? Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Entitled? I've spent 2 years catering to you, listening to your boring stories, pretending to care about your pathetic little life at that flower shop. If anyone's entitled to something in return, it's me. The cruelty of her words should have hurt, but instead they clarified everything. This woman had never seen me as a person, only as an obstacle to her financial security. My answer is still no, I said firmly, and it will continue to be no, no matter how many family ambushes you arrange, or how many relatives you convince that I'm incompetent. Vanessa's face flushed with anger. Her next words came out in a venomous whisper. You won't always have a choice, you know. A woman your age living alone. Accidents happen. Falls in the shower. Gas leaks. Matthew would be devastated, of course, but as your only heir, at least he'd finally have what's rightfully his. My blood ran cold. Was she actually threatening me? Before I could respond, Matthew appeared beside us, champagne glass in hand. Everything okay here? He asked, his eyes moving between us uncertainly. Your wife was just explaining why I should give you my apartment, I said, watching his face carefully. She's quite persuasive, almost threatening. Matthew frowned. Mom, don't start. Not today. Start what Matthew telling the truth about what's been happening. Vanessa stood abruptly smoothing her wedding gown. Her voice rose, ensuring nearby guests could hear. Matthew, your mother is being impossible again. I've tried so hard to help her, but she refuses to see reason. Several heads turned in our direction. Matthew's face flushed with embarrassment. Mom, please, he whispered. Not here, not now. Then when you've declared me incompetent, when you've taken legal control of my home. His expression confirmed everything. He knew. He had been part of the plan all along. Vanessa seized the moment, playing to her audience. Eleanor, just give us the keys, she demanded loudly. A woman your age doesn't need so much space. You're being selfish. By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the drama unfold. I could see the judgment in their eyes, most of them friends of Vanessa's family, primed to see me as the villain in this scenario. I will not give you my keys, I said, standing to face her. That apartment is my home. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. Her arms swung in a wide arc. The slap connected with my cheek with such force that my glasses went flying, landing on the marble floor with a crack. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. That's what you get for being so selfish. Vanessa screamed, her carefully curated image of the perfect bride shattered in an instant of unchecked fury. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. 130 guests stood in stunned silence. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves. But absolutely no one dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law, who had just been publicly humiliated. Matthew stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if I were invisible. You're not welcome here anymore, Vanessa continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. Matthew and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better. Her words were pure venom designed to wound as deeply as possible. For months I had endured her condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was the final straw. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked toward the exit, the whispers of the guests following me like a toxic cloud. Poor thing, she looks so fragile, whispered Vanessa's aunt. The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore, added Matthew's cousin. She should be in a retirement home, not living alone, another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was like acid pouring on open wounds. The cool temperature of the ballroom's air conditioning contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I had used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I had learned to value practicality over appearances, something Vanessa would clearly never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year, because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. Richard, it's Eleanor. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth. My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. Are you sure, Mrs. Reynolds? Richard asked with his professional but concerned voice. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I glanced back at the ballroom one last time where I could see Vanessa laughing with her friends, likely telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Matthew was by her side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what he had just witnessed. Completely sure, I replied. 30 minutes, Richard. No more. The parking lot was quiet, lit by streetlights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan, my cheek still stinging from the slap, and waited. 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. As I waited, memories of how I had reached this moment began to flood my mind. Looking back, I could see the warning signs I had ignored out of maternal love. The way Matthew had slowly changed after meeting Vanessa. How his calls became less frequent, his visits more businesslike. How he had stopped sharing details of his life with me only to reappear when he needed financial help. I remembered the first time I had secretly helped him financially. He had called in a panic, unable to make his car payment after an unexpected medical bill. I had transferred $3,000 directly to his bank, telling him it was an early birthday gift. The relief in his voice had been worth every penny. Over time, these gifts had become more frequent and substantial, but I had convinced myself I was just being a supportive mother. Now I realized I had been enabling a pattern of financial irresponsibility that had made him vulnerable to someone like Vanessa. My secret generosity had prevented him from learning the hard lessons of living within his means. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Just saw the video. Are you okay? Where are you video?" Of course, in this age of smartphones, someone had recorded the incident. By tomorrow, my humiliation would probably be all over social media. Strangely, the thought didn't bother me as much as it should have. I texted back, "In the parking lot, waiting for Richard. Could you bring me something from my apartment's second desk drawer brown folder?" Frank knew where I kept my spare key. He was probably the only person I truly trusted right now. While I waited, I pulled out the folder of documents I had brought with me, bank statements showing regular transfers to Matthew's account records, of payments made on his behalf, receipts for anonymous contributions toward this very wedding. Over the past 3 years, I had spent nearly $160,000 supporting my son's lifestyle. Money he believed came from work bonuses, tax refunds, or lucky breaks. My phone rang. It was Richard. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm 10 minutes away. Are you certain about this course of action?" "More certain than I've ever been about anything, Richard." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, stronger, more resolved. "The financial consequences for your son will be immediate and severe," he warned. "Once I cancel the transfers and guarantees he'll face serious financial difficulties. The wedding venue payment will be the first to go." "I understand." And I did. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. For too long, I had protected Matthew from the results of his choices. That protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable to me. It was time for that to end. A car pulled up beside mine, Frank arriving with the folder I'd requested. He got out and hurried over, his face creased with concern. "Eleanor," he said, leaning down to my window. "I saw what happened. That woman is a monster." He handed me the brown folder through the window. "What are you going to do?" I took the folder, feeling its weight not just physically, but what it represented. "Something I should have done a long time ago, Frank. I'm going to tell the truth." He nodded, understanding without needing details. "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. That girl slapped you in front of everyone, and Matthew just stood there. That's not the boy you raised." His words cut deep because they were true. The Matthew I raised would never have allowed anyone to hurt his mother, regardless of the circumstances. "Thank you, Frank, for everything." "What's in the folder?" he asked, nodding at the papers in my lap. I smiled sadly. The end of the masquerade. Inside were the documents that would shatter the facade I had maintained for decades. Property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements showing my true financial status. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. Frank squeezed my shoulder and returned to his car, promising to check on me later. As he drove away, headlights illuminated the parking lot entrance. Richard had arrived. He parked beside me, emerging from his luxury sedan with a sleek briefcase. At 58, Richard Morris looked every inch the successful financial advisor he was. Tailored suit, perfectly groomed silver hair, and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to handling millions. "Mrs. Reynolds." He greeted me formally, though his eyes showed genuine concern when he noticed my reddened cheek. "Are you all right?" "I've been better," I admitted, getting out of my car. "But I'm ready." Richard opened his briefcase on the hood of my car, revealing a series of documents arranged with his characteristic precision. "As requested, I've prepared everything. First, the order for immediate suspension of all bank transfers you've been making to Matthew Reynolds' accounts." He pointed to the first document. "Second, notice of cancellation for the lease agreement you've been guaranteeing. The landlord will receive this first thing tomorrow. And finally, cancellation of payment for tonight's venue effective immediately." I signed each document with a steady hand, feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation with each signature. "What about the will?" I asked. Richard produced another document. "The amendment is prepared. Once executed, all assets previously designated for Matthew will be redirected to charitable causes of your choosing. I've taken the liberty of researching organizations dedicated to preventing elder financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. Perfect. As we finished the paperwork, Frank returned with another folder in hand. His expression was grave. "Eleanor, you need to see this," he said, handing me several printed pages. "I found something when I was getting your folder." I scanned the documents, my blood running cold. They were printouts of emails between Matthew and a law firm specializing in guardianship cases. In clinical language, they discussed the process of having an elderly parent declared mentally incompetent, the evidence needed, and the legal strategy for gaining control of their assets. The most recent email, dated just 3 days ago, outlined a plan to gather statements from wedding guests about my erratic behavior to use as evidence in court. They were going to have me declared incompetent immediately after the wedding. I whispered, the full extent of the betrayal finally clear. This wasn't just about pressuring me to move. They were planning to take everything whether I agreed or not. Richard took the papers, his professional composure momentarily shaken. "This is disturbing, but it actually strengthens our position. If they attempt to proceed with this plan after tonight, we'll have evidence of their true motives." I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but soul-deep weariness from the weight of such calculated betrayal. "Let's get this over with," I said, gathering the documents. We walked toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step I could feel my heart beating faster. Not from nervousness, but from a strange combination of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to reclaim: my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when Richard and I entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Richard immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Vanessa was the first to react, her face flushing with anger as she spotted me from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photos with Matthew. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" she shouted, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice still carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. My returning with a well-known financial advisor clearly wasn't part of her script for the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Matthew Reynolds and Mrs. Vanessa Lewis Reynolds." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began to pull out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Matthew slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked, his voice no longer sounding as confident as it had when he had stood by while I was humiliated just minutes before. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he had had since childhood. "Matthew," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in months, "this is Richard Morris, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Richard opened his folder and took out the first document. "Mr. Matthew Reynolds, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Matthew's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. "Also," Richard continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Vanessa let out a gasp that echoed throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible," she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Matthew doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, Richard said, taking the last document from his folder, the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight. His words fell on the ballroom like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Matthew like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "You've been, all this time, you've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the small boy he had once been vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Matthew," I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I'd been living through. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you get through a difficult time. 3 years in which I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised. 3 years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you." Vanessa began to pace in circles, clutching her head with increasing desperation. "This can't be happening. This can't be real," she screamed as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You can't have money." "Appearances are deceiving, Vanessa," I said finally, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. "For years, I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them." The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the ballroom was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and the growing murmurs of the guests, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones, instinctively knowing that this story would become legendary. "Mom," Matthew said, his voice broken. "Please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost, not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. "The only way to fix this, Matthew," I replied, "was not to break it in the first place." The silence in the ballroom became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Vanessa stood motionless for the first time all night, her eyes darting between Richard the documents and my face, as if trying to find a crack in the reality that was collapsing around her. Matthew just stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of shock, belated comprehension, and absolute horror. "Mrs. Reynolds," Richard said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. I could see several guests moving closer, fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Please, Richard," I replied with a serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Vanessa tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Richard raised a hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. "Over the last 36 months, Richard began consulting his documents. Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son Matthew Reynolds and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment. Others pulled out calculators on their phones to verify the figures. Patricia Lewis, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. "Furthermore," Richard continued relentlessly, "Mrs. Reynolds personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $53,000. Money, which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Vanessa finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper." She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and some who were clearly amused by her desperation. "My dear Vanessa," I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her hysteria, "you have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband William and I valued privacy above ostentation. It turned out to be a very wise decision." Matthew finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. Mom, please, there has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this. His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. Destroy your life, I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home and have me declared incompetent? I reached into my purse and pulled out the email printouts Frank had given me. Wasn't it you who contacted the law firm of Goldstein & Associates 3 days ago to discuss having your own mother declared mentally incompetent immediately after your wedding? Matthew's face went from pale to ashen. How did you? That was different, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help. His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. You didn't know, I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. With each question, Matthew's posture shrank. Richard took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder. Mr. Reynolds, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Vanessa staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. You can't do that, she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling completely. We're your family. Matthew is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight. A stupid fight, I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on his wedding day? My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Harold Lewis, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. Mrs. Reynolds, he said with forced politeness, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit. His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. There's nothing to discuss in private, I replied firmly. Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public. The guests' heads moved between us as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. Richard closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. Mrs. Reynolds, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately. He turned to Matthew and Vanessa with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. Vanessa finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the ballroom. Everything is ruined, she murmured through her tears. Everything we planned, everything we worked for, it's all destroyed. Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Matthew went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Vanessa, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to fix this, Matthew, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way, like everyone else does. The ballroom remained in absolute silence, every person present knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Richard and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As we walked toward the exit, the silence behind us was interrupted by a voice I didn't expect to hear. "Wait, Eleanor." It was Lisa Matthews' cousin, who had been sitting at a table in the back throughout the confrontation. She ran toward us with tears in her eyes and an expression of absolute horror on her face. "Aunt Eleanor," Lisa said in a trembling voice, "I didn't know anything about this. I swear Matthew never told me what they were planning with you." Lisa had always been my favorite niece, a 29-year-old who worked as a teacher and had maintained a close relationship with me even after Matthew had distanced himself. If I had known what they were going to do to you, I would have tried to stop them. I stopped and looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same honesty I had known since she was a little girl. "I know, Lisa," I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. "You have always been different. You've never seen people as opportunities or resources to be exploited." Her tears fell harder as she nodded, clearly devastated by her brother's actions. "But why did you never tell us about the money?" Lisa asked with genuine confusion. "Why did you keep all this a secret for so many years?" It was a question that deserved an honest answer, especially coming from someone who had always treated me with respect and genuine love. "Because your Uncle William and I learned a long time ago that money changes people," I explained as some guests discreetly moved closer to listen. "We have seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans, and children who see their parents as walking ATMs. We decided to live simply to protect the relationships that really mattered." Lisa nodded slowly, beginning to understand the wisdom behind my decisions. "But Matthew, he was different before. When we were kids, he would have defended anyone who hurt you. What happened to him?" Her question contained all the pain of a cousin who had watched her relative transform into someone unrecognizable. "What happened to him was Vanessa," I replied with sadness but without bitterness. "What happened to him was greed disguised as love ambition without values, and me, in my effort to protect him, I deprived him of the chance to learn important lessons about responsibility and consequences." My answer resonated through the ballroom, where the guests were still engrossed in every word. Richard had respectfully stayed to the side during this exchange, but now he approached and murmured something in my ear. "Mrs. Reynolds, the ballroom manager, is approaching. It seems he's already found out about the cancellation of the guaranteed payment." Indeed, I could see a burly man in a suit walking toward us with several papers in his hands and a very serious expression. "Mrs. Reynolds," the manager said in a tense voice, "I just received a payment cancellation notice that is highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here?" His presence added a new layer of immediate reality to the crisis I had just triggered. "Mr. Martinez," I replied, remembering his name from the conversations we had when I secretly arranged the wedding payment. "The financial guarantee I provided for this celebration has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light tonight." I gestured toward Matthew and Vanessa, who remained in the center of the ballroom like statues of despair. "I understand," Martinez said, looking at the scene with the experience of someone who had handled social events for decades. "And who will be responsible for the payment now?" "The total outstanding amount is $53,000, including the ballroom food, music, flowers, and photography services." His voice was professional but firm, making it clear that someone would have to solve this problem immediately. Matthew finally reacted, approaching us with hesitant steps. "Mr. Martinez, there must be some misunderstanding. My mom, she can't just cancel the payment like that. We're family. This can be resolved." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before. The desperation of a man who finally understood the magnitude of his situation. "Young man," Martinez said with the forced patience of a professional, "the financial guarantee was provided by Mrs. Reynolds personally and privately. She has the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any time. I now need someone to provide an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to suspend the event." Vanessa approached, stumbling her wedding dress now completely disheveled and her makeup smeared with tears. "You can't do this," she yelled at Martinez. "It's our wedding day. You can't ruin our wedding day over money problems." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing discomfort. "Ma'am," Martinez replied with growing firmness, "I am not ruining anything. I am simply following the contractual terms that you signed. If you cannot provide an alternative payment immediately, I will have to ask all guests to leave and suspend all services." His ultimatum fell on the ballroom like a final sentence. The reality of the situation began to penetrate the minds of the guests. Some had already started to grab their bags and discreetly head for the exits. Others remained fascinated by the drama that continued to unfold like spectators at a traffic accident they couldn't look away from. "Mom," Matthew said, approaching me with tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. "Please, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photos, memories. You can't destroy all this over a fight." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the little boy he had once been. "Matthew," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "I am not destroying anything. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love, when you chose manipulation over honesty, when you chose to publicly humiliate me instead of treating me with the respect I deserve as your mother." Each word was like a dagger, but they were words that needed to be said. "But what are we going to do?" Vanessa asked in a desperate voice, looking at the guests who continued to leave the ballroom. "How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for all of this?" Her panic was evident, and I could see she was finally starting to understand the real implications of her actions. "You're going to do what all responsible adults do," I replied. "You're going to find ways to earn money honestly. You're going to learn to live within your means. You're going to discover what it means to work hard for the things you want instead of expecting others to provide them for you." My voice had grown stronger, and I could feel decades of accumulated wisdom pouring out through my words. Richard approached discreetly and murmured, "Mrs. Reynolds, the legal process is complete. All documents have been delivered and explained. There is nothing more we can do here." His message was clear. It was time to leave to let Matthew and Vanessa face the consequences of their decisions, without my presence as a distraction. Lisa approached once more and hugged me tightly. "Aunt Eleanor, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my love no matter what happens with Matthew." Her words were like balm for my wounded heart, reminding me that not all family had been corrupted by greed. "And you will always have mine, Lisa," I replied, returning the hug. "Remember this night when you make important decisions in your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we have, but by how we treat the people we love." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded, completely understanding the lesson that was unfolding before her eyes. Martinez approached again, this time with greater urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need an immediate resolution. I have other commitments tonight and cannot keep staff here indefinitely without a guarantee of payment." His professional patience was finally running out, adding additional pressure to an already desperate situation. "You have my phone number," I said to Matthew and Vanessa for the last time. "When you are ready to have a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you have learned what it means to earn things for yourselves, when you can look me in the eye and offer a genuine apology for what you did to me tonight, then we can talk. But until that time comes," I added, looking at them directly, "you will have to find a way to solve the mess you created all on your own." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit, with Richard leaving behind a ballroom full of chaos, despair, and the harsh reality of deserved consequences. As we stepped into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the unburdened lightness of absolute truth. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to pretend to hide to calculate what I could reveal. The mask of modesty had been shed, and standing in its place was the real Eleanor Reynolds, imperfect perhaps, but finally authentically herself. 6 months after the wedding, I found myself sitting in the makeup chair of the city's most prestigious television studio. The program Life Stories had contacted Richard after videos of the wedding confrontation accumulated more than 2 million views on social media. My story had resonated with thousands of seniors who had experienced similar situations, with their families becoming a symbol of resistance against elder abuse. 2 minutes, Mrs. Reynolds," the production assistant announced, adjusting my microphone. I caught my reflection in the mirror, noting how different I looked from the woman who had walked into Royal Oak's ballroom half a year ago. The perpetual worry lines between my brows had softened. My posture was straighter, more confident. I'd even splurged on a new haircut that framed my face in a way that made me look years younger. "Nervous?" asked Catherine Miller, the renowned journalist who would be conducting the interview. At 55, she had built a career on integrity and compassion, known for tackling difficult subjects with sensitivity. "A little," I admitted. "I've never told my story publicly before." "Just speak from the heart," she advised, reviewing her notes. The letters we've received from viewers about your story have been overwhelming. You've touched something profound in people. The red light on the camera blinked on, and Catherine's professional smile settled into place. Good evening and welcome to Life Stories. I'm Catherine Miller, and tonight we have with us Eleanor Reynolds, a 68-year-old woman whose confrontation at her son's wedding has ignited a national conversation about family exploitation of seniors. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, I replied, finding my voice stronger than expected. 6 months after that viral moment at your son's wedding, how does it feel to know your story has inspired so many people? I took a deep breath. I feel grateful. Grateful that something as painful as the loss of my relationship with my son has served to help others in similar situations. For months, I felt isolated and confused, wondering if I was the one who was wrong. Now I know that what I experienced is more common than any of us would like to admit. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Tell us about the years leading up to that night when you started to realize something wasn't right in your relationship with Matthew and Vanessa. It started with small things, I explained, remembering those early warning signs I had ignored. Comments about my age, suggestions that I could no longer take care of myself, subtle pressures to make decisions that truly benefited them, not me. Family abuse rarely begins with physical violence or shouting. It begins with the gradual erosion of your self-confidence, with making you question your own reality. Richard, who had joined me for the interview to provide financial context, leaned forward. What Eleanor describes is a classic pattern we see in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, especially when they are family members, use psychological manipulation tactics before proceeding to more direct forms of coercion. It's particularly insidious because it's disguised as loving concern. And the moment of revelation, Catherine asked. When did you decide to expose the truth about your financial situation? The slap, I replied simply. When Vanessa slapped me in the ballroom in front of 130 people for refusing to hand over my apartment keys, something fundamental shifted. I knew she had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. In that moment, I understood that it was no longer about protecting my family from the consequences of their actions. It was about protecting myself from continuing to be abused. Throughout the interview, I detailed the conspiracy to declare me incompetent, the secret financial support I had provided for years, and the legal battle that had followed the wedding. Each answer was designed not just to tell my story, but to educate others about the warning signs and available resources. The legal case Matthew and Vanessa attempted to build against me collapsed spectacularly, I explained. When Richard presented evidence of their conspiracy, including their emails with attorneys about having me declared incompetent, the judge not only dismissed their case but ordered them to pay my legal fees, which amounted to $45,000. That must have been financially devastating for them, Catherine observed. It was, Richard confirmed. Given their already precarious financial situation, this additional burden forced them to declare bankruptcy within weeks. The bankruptcy had been swift and merciless. Matthew lost his job when his employer discovered the public scandal. Vanessa's attempt to start an image consulting business failed when potential clients connected her to the viral wedding videos. They were now living in a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, working entry-level jobs and struggling to pay their accumulated debts. Mrs. Reynolds, Catherine said near the end of the program, do you have a message for your son if he's watching this interview tonight? It was the question I had both dreaded and hoped for. I looked directly into the camera, knowing there was a chance Matthew might be watching. Matthew, if you're listening, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you're my son. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. Loving someone doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. I paused, feeling tears begin to well up. The door to my heart will always be open for you, but only if you can walk through it as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be. Only if you can look me in the eye and accept full responsibility for your actions. Only if you can show that you've learned that family is built on love and respect, not on opportunism and manipulation. Then, addressing the broader audience, I added, and for everyone watching who recognizes their own story in mine, I want you to know that you have the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age. You have the right to make your own decisions about your money, your home, your life. You have the right to set boundaries with family members who treat you poorly. And you have the right to seek help when those boundaries are violated. When the cameras turned off, the studio erupted in applause from the production crew. Catherine embraced me with tears in her eyes. "Eleanor, that was one of the most powerful interviews I've ever conducted. It's going to change lives." Richard nodded proudly. "You've accomplished something bigger than winning a legal case. You've given a voice to people who've been silenced for too long." That night, as Frank drove me home with Lisa and Sophia in the back seat, I felt more at peace than I had been in years. I had told my truth. I had defended my dignity, and I had used my pain to help others. "Eleanor," Sophia said from the back seat, "I am so proud of you. You've turned the worst experience of your life into something that will protect thousands of people." Her words resonated in my heart as we arrived at my apartment building, the apartment that Vanessa had once coveted and that now truly felt like home again. Not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. 2 years passed since that night that divided my life into before and after. In those 24 months, I experienced a transformation so profound that sometimes I barely recognized the woman I had been. On this particular morning, I was sitting on my balcony reviewing notes for a board meeting when my phone rang. It was Carmen, the executive director of the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation for Elder Protection, the organization I had founded using the inheritance I had redirected from Matthew. "Eleanor, we have 23 new cases this week," Carmen informed me with that mixture of sadness and determination that characterized everyone who worked in this field. All with similar patterns: adult children pressuring older parents for property or money, threats of abandonment, emotional manipulation. "Send me the 5 most urgent ones," I replied. "I'll review them personally before the meeting." Every case that crossed my desk was like looking into a mirror of my past. Yesterday, I had reviewed the file of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter had convinced her to sell her house for her own good, only to discover the money had financed a failed business venture and a vacation in Europe. The day before, it was a 69-year-old man whose twin daughters had emotionally blackmailed him. "If you don't lend us $50,000, you'll never see your grandchildren again." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had transformed my worst personal experience into my most meaningful life purpose. In 2 years, the foundation had helped more than 400 seniors regain control over their finances, properties, and most importantly, their self-esteem. We had specialized lawyers, social workers, psychologists, and a support network that I wished I'd had when I felt so lonely and confused. Frank was still my dearest neighbor, though he was now also the foundation's vice president. At 72, he had found renewed purpose, giving lectures on detecting family manipulation. "Eleanor," he had told me last week while we reviewed cases, "I never thought my golden years would include becoming a detective for dysfunctional families, but it's the best adventure I've ever had." Lisa had moved into the apartment next door a year ago after her divorce from a marriage that had lasted only 8 months. Working as the foundation's educational director had given her purpose she'd never found as a traditional teacher. "Aunt Eleanor," she often told me, "you taught me that sometimes real family doesn't come from blood, but from those who choose to respect you unconditionally." The public response to my story had brought unexpected opportunities. The book I wrote with an investigative journalist, "When Love Hurts, an Elderly Woman Fights Back," had become a national bestseller with more than 200,000 copies sold. All royalties went directly to the foundation. The letters I received from readers were living testimonies that my experience had resonated in thousands of homes where silence had been the norm. Richard remained my financial advisor, but now he was also the foundation's principal accountant. His experience handling the legal aspects of my confrontation with Matthew had become invaluable in helping others in similar situations. "Mrs. Reynolds," he told me during our monthly meeting, "we've recovered more than $3 million in properties and savings that abusive family members had illegally obtained from vulnerable seniors. Your personal story has created systemic change." The question everyone asked, the one that came up in every interview and every deep conversation, was whether I missed Matthew. The answer was complex and painful. I missed the child he had been, the young man who had shown flashes of kindness and integrity. I missed the illusion of the family I thought we had. But I didn't miss the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, or the systematic disrespect of our final years together. Matthew had attempted contact exactly 3 times during these 2 years. The first was 6 months after the television interview, when apparently some co-workers had seen the show and started treating him differently. The second was when his son, my grandson Andrew, was born 14 months ago. The third was 3 months ago when Vanessa left him taking the baby and half of their meager possessions. Each time he had called asking for financial help, never offering a genuine apology or acknowledging the harm he had caused. His pattern remained identical. He saw his problems as external injustices, not as consequences of his decisions. The last conversation lasted less than 5 minutes and ended when he said, "Mom, your pride is more important than your grandson." I replied with a clarity that surprised me. "Matthew, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope that one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I had ever hung up on my son, and it was strangely liberating. The subject of Andrew, my grandson, remained the only one that could still make me cry. At 14 months old, he didn't know me. When Vanessa left, she took all family photographs, including the few I had of him from social media. I had created a trust fund for his college education administered by Richard that would be available when he turned 18, regardless of the relationship we might have by then. Maybe Sophia told me during our weekly dinners, when Andrew is older, he'll seek his own answers about what happened in his family. Maybe he'll find the courage to get to know his grandmother for himself. Sophia had become my closest confidant, especially since she had set difficult boundaries with toxic family members a decade earlier. Her wisdom and experience helped me navigate the unfamiliar territory of estrangement with grace. What surprised me most about these 2 years was how much my physical and mental health had improved. During those final years with Matthew and Vanessa, I had developed chronic insomnia, constant headaches, and anxiety that kept me in a state of permanent vigilance. Now my doctor was astonished by my test results. Eleanor, Dr. Hernandez, had told me during my last checkup, "It's remarkable how the body responds when we eliminate sources of toxic stress. Your blood pressure is perfect. Your sleep pattern is healthy. Even your posture has improved." He was right. I walked taller. My voice sounded firmer. My hands no longer trembled when making important decisions. As I prepared for bed on the 2nd anniversary of the wedding confrontation, I found myself reflecting on how drastically my life had changed. The flower shop where I had worked had closed a year ago, but I had discovered a new passion in the community garden I helped establish in our building. I taught other senior residents about medicinal plants and organic growing techniques, an activity that connected me with the earth and with people who appreciated accumulated wisdom instead of seeing it as obsolescence. My current routine included 3 days at the foundation offices, 2 days visiting seniors who needed emotional support, and weekends dedicated to writing my second book, this one focusing on practical strategies for detecting and preventing family financial abuse. The apartment that had been a source of such greed was now a space of peace and creativity. I had converted Matthew's old room into an office where I received people who needed guidance. The walls were filled with thank you letters and photos of families we had helped reconcile in healthier ways. One of the most rewarding experiences had been mentoring other older women facing similar situations. Margaret, a 74-year-old widow, had come to the foundation 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to pay gambling debts. We worked together for 3 months, and last week she sent me a photo of herself smiling beside her new car, purchased with her own money after legally recovering the funds. Eleanor Margaret wrote, "You taught me that setting boundaries is not cruelty, it's survival. You taught me that self-love is not selfishness, it's a necessity. You taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." Her words reminded me why all this pain had been worthwhile. Tonight, a particular date caught my attention on my calendar. Tomorrow, I would be testifying before a state Senate committee on proposed legislation to strengthen protections for seniors against financial exploitation by family members. The bill, informally known as Eleanor's Law, would establish stricter penalties and create a specialized task force to investigate cases of elder financial abuse. As I prepared my testimony, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Patricia Lewis." My heart skipped a beat. Vanessa's mother had not spoken to me since the wedding. "Patricia," I acknowledged, keeping my voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "I know." Her voice sounded different, less haughty, more uncertain. "I'm calling because, well, things have happened that I think you should know about." She explained that after leaving Matthew, Vanessa had moved in with her parents, bringing baby Andrew. The arrangement had quickly become strained when Vanessa resumed her extravagant spending habits despite having no income. 3 weeks ago, she left without warning, Patricia said, her voice breaking. "She took some jewelry cash in my car. She left Andrew with us. We filed a police report, but..." She paused. "Eleanor, we're in our 70s. We can't raise a toddler." "What about Matthew?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. He's a mess. Lost another job. Drinking too much. He can barely take care of himself, let alone a child. There was a long silence before Patricia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. We were wrong about you, Eleanor. The things we said, the way we treated you. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but for Andrew's sake, would you consider meeting us? The conversation lasted another 30 minutes as we arranged to meet the following afternoon. When I hung up, I sat motionless, processing what this might mean. Not just for me, but for the grandson I had never held. The next morning, I called Richard to discuss the legal implications of potentially becoming involved in Andrew's life. Then I contacted Lisa, who immediately offered to accompany me to the meeting with Patricia and Harold. Whatever you decide, Lisa assured me, I'm with you. That afternoon, as I prepared to leave for my Senate testimony, I paused at the door of what had once been Matthew's room. For 2 years, I had transformed every painful memory into fuel for positive change. Now I was being offered an unexpected chance to forge a new kind of family legacy, not based on obligation or blood, but on conscious choice and healthy boundaries. I had no illusions that reconciliation with Matthew would be easy or even possible. He would need to demonstrate profound change before I could trust him again. But Andrew, an innocent child caught in circumstances beyond his control, deserved the chance to know his grandmother. As I stepped out of my apartment building, I glimpsed my reflection in the lobby mirror. At 70 years old, I stood straighter, looked healthier, and felt more purposeful than I had at 68. The woman who had once hidden behind a mask of modesty now faced the world with authentic strength. The journey hadn't given me the traditional happy ending where all conflicts resolve and family reunites in perfect harmony. But it had given me something better: reclaimed dignity, meaningful purpose, and the freedom to define family on my own terms. If I could send a message to the Eleanor who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, the woman who trembled as she picked up her broken glasses from the floor, I would tell her, have courage. What is about to happen will be painful beyond words. But on the other side awaits a life more authentic and purposeful than you ever imagined possible. Tonight I would speak before legislators about turning personal pain into societal change. Tomorrow I would meet my grandson for the first time. And in the days that followed, I would continue building a legacy of dignity, boundaries, and second chances, proving that sometimes the most meaningful chapters of our lives begin exactly when we think our story is ending. As I stepped into the waiting car, I felt the warm spring breeze against my face, a gentle reminder that seasons change, wounds heal, and new beginnings are always possible at any age. I had learned that the end of a toxic relationship is not a loss, it's a liberation. I had discovered that true family is chosen as much as it is inherited, and I had proven that it is never too late to rewrite your own story.